stage, Lieutenant Governor Todd Lamb.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you again. It's my privilege in this part of our conference to really to introduce somebody. If you're an Oklahoman, well, scratch that. If you read the Wall Street Journal, if you're involved in energy, if you're involved in the party, if you're a conservative, this man does not need an introduction. But I have one here. It's my privilege to introduce somebody, not just somebody, but when Steve Fair, who's doing a great job at this conference, the first phone call he made to get financial support, the chief underwriter, if you will, for this conference is who I'm about to introduce. It's a privilege for me to have a Q&A with this gentleman. If you bear with me, I would first like to tell you a little bit about the company that he founded, Devon Energy. The company's proved reserves total 3 billion equivalent barrels, which are focused entirely onshore in North America. Devon is also one of the largest independent processors of natural gas and natural gas liquids in North America. The company has an enterprise value of approximately $25 billion. Devon is included in the S&P 500 index, and its common shares are traded on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol DVN. Devon has been ranked on Fortune's magazine list of the 100 best companies to work for in America for 8 consecutive years. That's because of leadership. In addition, the company is consistently included on Fortune's World's Most Admired Companies list. That's because of leadership. In 2010, Devon ranked first in its sector in areas of innovation, social responsibility, and long-term investment. That's all because of leadership. So, let me introduce the leader. Larry Nichols is co-founder and executive chairman of Devon Energy Corporation, one of the nation's largest independent natural gas and oil producers. Nichols earned his BA in geology from Princeton University and his Juris Doctorate from the University of Michigan. He later served as special assistant to Assistant Attorney General William Rehnquist from 1968 to 70. He served as law clerk to Justice Tom Clark and Chief Justice Earl Warren in the United States Supreme Court. A leader in the industry, Nichols serves as the former chairman and a current director of the American Petroleum Institute. He's the first CEO of an independent oil and natural gas company to serve as API's chairman. He serves on the board of Baker Hughes Incorporated and Sonic Corp. He's on the board of directors for a Business Industry Political Action Committee and the National Association of Manufacturers in Washington, D.C. He was named, this is no surprise, he was named one of Oklahoma's most admired CEOs in 2010 and Oklahoma Today's Oklahoman of the Year in 2013. He's helped at the GOP for decades. Please help me welcome to the stage, Mr. Larry Nichols. Welcome.
Way too generous. We should never stand. He's way too generous.
No, it's all true, but I also know who pays the bills. But it's all true. It's all very, very true. This really is a privilege for me to sit here and do a Q&A with you, Larry. Thank you for your time. I'd love to know how many hours you put in a day and how busy you are, but carving out time to be here and to support, one, to support, but two, to take time to be here and to visit with us and participate in this conference personally. Thank you for doing that. You've done a lot. From Princeton undergrad, I'm read in your bio, Michigan Law School, you clerked for a while. After that clerkship on the Supreme Court, you probably could have landed a lawyer job pretty much anywhere you wanted to. But from Princeton undergrad, fast forward to the tallest skyscraper in Oklahoma, downtown Oklahoma City. If you would, just give us a kind of an overview from Princeton to current state Devon Energy?
Well, a couple of decades.
In about 2 minutes, if you would, Larry.
Right. Well, I actually did plan to practice law in Washington, but my father had the idea of starting a new oil and gas company. This was 1971, and I asked him how much he would pay as a salary, and he told me, I said, Dad, I can make more money than that practicing law in Washington. And he said, but Larry, you're not worth that much. So we dickered back and forth for a while, and finally I said, okay, I'll come down and help you out for a couple of years. And at that time we had 4.5 employees and 5 wells, and today we have 5,000 employees and 29,000 wells. So
how about that? That's growth.
It worked out.
There's been a lot of changes that you've seen since founding Devon with your father, especially the increase in domestic energy production. What's led to the dramatic increase in that production?
Technology. It is just amazing, and you can see that in all aspects of our lives. We were celebrating the 20th anniversary of the memorial, and my grandchildren didn't understand why I didn't use my cell phone in the hospital, why I was using a payphone. Technology has changed so much in our industry. It continues to do that. If you go back in history, right after World War I, there was a learned government report that said the oil that we'd had coming out of Azerbaijan that helped in World War I was a geologic freak of nature. All the oil has been discovered. And you can go back and decade after decade after decade, for 100 years, there is inevitably some learned governmental study, some university professor who puts out a report that says peak oil has arrived and we're in an irreversible decline. Literally for 100 years, they're always wrong, and they're always wrong for exactly the same reason, and that is technology. The technology we have today is profound. We can drill a well 2 miles into the ground, turn that well, and drill that well horizontally 4 or 5 miles. We couldn't do that 10 years ago. We couldn't do that. And we now know that as that objective formation comes and goes, we can have real live geologic information that let us follow that formation up and down. What we can do today makes what we did 10 years ago look like horse and buggy. So it's technology.
Technology. Well, you mentioned World War I. You had give it.
I wasn't here then, mind you.
Of course you weren't. Of course you weren't. But you gave historical perspective in relation to technology. Now, I don't know if we can go back to World War I with presidential campaigns and rhetoric, but for a campaign after campaign after campaign after campaign, et cetera, repeating bar over the word campaign, we've heard candidates talk about the need for energy independence. Why has it been such a slow process?
It took a long time. Prices were low, and you're right. Every president since Richard Nixon through George W. Bush has said solemnly, my goal was to make the United States energy independent. And the ironic thing is, for the first time since Richard Nixon, we have a president who has not said that, and yet we have a country that's about to do that. And it's because of technology.
So the private sector does do it?
The private sector does do it. If you look at technology, well, you can look at that. Most of the technology that we're using now has been on private lands, not on lands of the federal government. During the 8 years of Bush leased on average 4.5 million acres per year to us to go drill. During Obama, instead of 4.5 million acres, it's 1.5 million acres. When Obama came in, 36% of our production came from federal lands. Today, it's down to 21%. It's because federal lands are a difficult place to work. You can't grow there. All of the growth we've achieved has been on private lands, state lands.
We're doing a lot of history here. We're going from World War I to Nixon. Let's talk about 1975. Congress reacted to the Arab oil embargo in '75, banning exports. We don't live in that world anymore. What's your advice, either to the candidates, advice to the country? Let's make you Secretary of Energy in the next administration. Just hypothetically thinking, what's your advice? What's the white paper with the premise we're no longer in the 1975 era world, particularly related to energy.
You're right. There's now an export ban, banning the export of oil. That was passed in 1975, right after the first Arab embargo. Congress felt a need to do something. No one really cared because we didn't have any oil to export. So they could take a heroic stand. Our production in the United States peaked in 1970, was going into what everyone thought would be an irreversible decline. Conventional wisdom. I and everyone else thought U.S. production is in an irreversible decline. We can't redo that. So ban the export of oil. Who cares? In early 1980s, there were some price controls at the same time. In the early 1980s, they repealed the price controls, but didn't because policymakers had figured out that those price controls were counterproductive. But they didn't mess with the ban on export. No one really cared. Why bother? It's irrelevant. That scarcity mentality is a product of the ancient past. Today, the United States is rapidly becoming an energy superpower, something that you would not have guessed 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. We are set to pass both Russia and Saudi Arabia to become the world's largest producer of oil. That's amazing. And in 2010, we did become the world's largest producer of natural gas. We are now producing so much oil in the United States that we no longer have a place to put it. Storage is full. We have shut down wells. It has depressed the price of oil in the United States to a level that is significantly lower than the world price of oil. That has led to layoffs, large layoffs. Tens of thousands of people are getting laid off all the time by our service supply industry, by producers, by countries. Our budgets are getting cut. So one thing I would tell the president is get rid of this silly export ban. Let's take a vote. Look at what it would do for the United States. Jobs, economic growth, put the industry back to work, allow us to export that oil, allow us to drill those wells here in the United States and not somewhere else. IHC just did a study that showed it would generate $750 billion of economic growth. If you were to start that, it would generate $13.8 billion of tax revenues going into state coffers. That's real money. That's real money, and we're just sitting on that. Impact on the balance of payments. Export that oil. Bring some of those dollars back from China. Bring them back here where we can put them to work. Help the balance of payments. Energy security. You know, someday we may we may need that oil production. If we wait until there's a real crisis in some of the bad places where we import oil from, Venezuela, Nigeria, unstable countries like that, the Middle East, all of those places, if suddenly there's a crisis and one of those countries stops selling to us or stop producing, we'll have the oil in the ground, but we can't get it, and we can't go get it quickly. Drill those wells now, let those wells produce, export the oil until we need it, and when we need it, it'll be here and be available. Radically changes our policy in the U.S. from a security standpoint, because we can become energy independent. I never thought I'd say that until the last couple of years. We could become energy independent in the United States. And look at the impact it had just in our dealings with other countries. Europe, very dependent upon Russian oil and natural gas. We could export to them. We could make sure they're our friends, so that when policymakers in Europe and policymakers in the United States don't have to worry about where our respective countries are going to get the oil, because we get it right here. And they can make policy decisions without that little nuisance factor there. So it makes perfect sense.
Obviously, not everybody has an oil and gas company in Oklahoma.
Well,
obviously.
Get one.
Go get one. If you don't have one, go get one. Well, I state the obvious to state the other obvious, but we're all engaged in the industry because we all fill up our vehicles. So in relation to the ban, and I'd like you to, if you would, just touch on the biggest hurdle in repealing the ban, and particularly, if you would, and you alluded to it earlier, but the misinformation, confusion, intentional misinformation on how what the other side says it would impact gasoline prices and what the truth is.
Yeah, when you first think about it, what I've said is that if we started exporting oil to the United States, this artificial surplus in the United States would go away, and the price of crude oil in the United States would rise to a world price. Logically, that would say, well, gasoline prices are going to rise too. That makes perfect sense, except it's wrong for one curious reason. While we banned the export of crude oil, we have never had a ban on the export of gasoline, of diesel fuel, of jet fuel, of any of the refined products. In fact, every day, our country exports 3.5 million barrels of refined product. So our gasoline prices in the U.S. are already priced at a world market. The ironic thing is that in their studies by Rice University, by Brookings Institute, by the U.S. Governmental Accountability Office, that show gasoline prices would actually go down. And here's why. We produce more oil into the world market. Better supply out there, that drives the price of oil down, of the world price of oil down. That drives the world price of gasoline down too. That says that a refinery no longer has any incentive to sell that gasoline internationally. That refinery is going to sell that gas here in the United States. In fact, and that drives down the price of gasoline here in the United States. In fact, if you look at the one group that is lobbying to keep this are the refineries, because they can buy the crude oil at a depressed price, which is artificially depressed by the ban, and then export the refined product, the gasoline, at a world price. It's a good deal for them. But for the American consumer, every study that's been done shows the price of gasoline is more likely to go down.
Everybody in this room is an American consumer. Price of gasoline going down, does that sound good? Long overdue? You mentioned earlier that a professor or two over the years has predicted or just been pretty emphatic. Found it all. There's no more. What do you say to the next professor that issues the study or statement or tweet now, new technology, that, well, if you open up, if you repeal the ban and we extract more, explore more, extract more, produce more, and start to export, we're going to run out?
Well, as I said, they've been wrong 100 years for that line of reasoning, and there's no reason they won't be wrong again, and it's because of technology. You can go back in time. At one time, the Gulf of Mexico, this is back in the 60s or so, was referred to as the Dead Sea because all the oil and gas had been discovered there. Now there's robust activity out there. Here in Oklahoma, in West Texas, areas that you'd look at a map and you think, surely the oil and gas industry has poked a hole everywhere and discovered all the oil. Where are the biggest boom? Where's most of our oil coming from in this renaissance in the industry? Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, places we've been drilling for generations. And it's because of technology. If you stop drilling, then you stop the need to do any more technology. There's no economic incentive to do that. And that stops the development of more resources. Let us go out there and compete in the world. The technology will continue to develop, like it has for over 100 years.
We've got about 6.5 minutes left. What's your forecast? That's not fair to ask you in 6.5 minutes what your forecast is. If there is time, I'm going to ask you maybe one or two follow-ups, but what's your forecast for, and you've talked about it off and on during this conversation, what's your forecast for energy in America going forward?
Well, I, of course, know what the price of oil is going to be. No, I don't. Except I know it's been volatile. That depends a lot upon policymakers. You can look in our industry. The Obama administration has been very hostile to our industry, to all forms of energy. And if we have 4 more years or 8 more years of that, it'll have an adverse impact. The layoffs in our industry will continue, and that'll ricochet around the country. It's easy and simple to see what needs to be done, eliminate this ban on export. There is no other industry where we have bans on export. In fact, the U.S. has 2 bans on exporting oil. We ban Iran from exporting oil, and we ban the United States. And the Obama administration is working to lift the ban on Iran. Now, as a simple Okie, I just can't figure that out. We kind of have that backwards.
That's good.
And a pipeline. We're trying to get the Keystone Pipeline. You realize World War II, from the time we entered World War II until we finished it, 3 years. This administration has been thinking about allowing a piece of steel to cross the Canadian border for 6 years, and they haven't figured that out yet. It's a pipeline, for crying out loud. That's all it is. To bring oil from Canada down to the United States. Where would you rather import oil from? Canada? Or Saudi Arabia, Libya, Yemen, Egypt, Nigeria? What's your choice? Would you rather import oil on ships, which is the most, from an environmental standpoint, the most risky area to import oil? Most of the big mistakes and disasters have been on ships, or pipelines, which are by far the safer than trains. How would you rather import oil? By ship or by pipeline? Pipelines are by far the safest, cheapest, simplest, easiest to protect from terrorist events. You can go on down the list. So eliminating all of these artificial constraints on the free enterprise system and let us go to work. It always amazes me when I go back to Washington and I'm talking with groups with the U.S. Chamber or the National Association of Manufacturers, and inevitably I'm sitting next to someone from Ohio who makes widgets. He tells me what he makes and I don't really understand what it is. And you ask him what his main problems are and concerns are. Government regulation. You just hear it over and over and over again. Get that off our back and let us go to work in a clean, efficient, environmentally responsible way. We can do that.
Amen.
So it depends upon who the next president is. It depends upon who has control of the House and Senate. And that'll dictate by far which way this country goes.
Policy matters.
Policy matters.
Policy matters. You know your introduction. You lived your life. You heard me say, this gentleman to my left, to your right, one of the most admired CEOs, not just in Oklahoma, but the country. Devon, one of the greatest companies to work for anywhere. You're a publicly traded company. You have a board. You were founded in Oklahoma. How and why did you remain in Oklahoma with a board and with maybe desires or offers or discussions to possibly not remain?
We did get offers from time to time from other cities that would like us to move there. No need to do that. A lot of people graduated from our schools here in Oklahoma over the years, and it's amazing how many times we've gotten unsolicited people who send in their resume and say, I'm now working for XYZ large company and I'm stationed here, but I'd really like to come back to Oklahoma because it's home. Do you have a slot for me? And a whole lot of times, yes, we do. Come on back. Come on back. Glad to have you. So Oklahoma City is a great place. There are a lot of other good places around the country, but it's sort of a comfortable size. It's big enough to have all the amenities you'd want in a city to attract a wide diversity of people, and yet small enough that it's still a friendly place to work.
Last question. I'm going to throw three at you. You answer what you want to answer, because you're Larry Nichols. I'm just asking questions. What do you want us to know that we may not know about Devon? What do you want us to know that we may not know about Larry Nichols? Or tell us how and why you got engaged in the Republican Party and why you've been steadfast on moving the needle in policy and why these principles and convictions matter to you. Any of those?
I never, when I grew up, I was not active in politics at all. There are a lot of people you're going to hear today and tomorrow that were young Republican this. I just went to work and did my job and didn't pay much attention to what was going on in government until government started really bothering me. And time again, when you would see these impediments to growth that serve no worthwhile purpose. I'll give you a simple example. The Obama administration has proposed new fracturing rules on when you can drill a well. So to drill a well in Oklahoma or Texas, you get your permits, you go out, you drill the well, you complete it, you get the pipeline, and you start producing very efficiently. Now we will file a permit with the federal government to get, first you got to get the lease. Then you have to fight off the litigation. Then you get a permit to drill. You drill the well and you get down to the objective formation and you want to complete it. You got to stop, go file another permit with the Department of Interior, explaining to them how you're going to complete the well. That takes time for them to do it. You get that permit, then you can complete the well. Then you go back to Washington again with another form that tells you them how you completed the well. They process that, and if they approve it, then you hope you've gotten your separate permit to build a pipeline. That's why production in the U.S. is on federal lands is dropping like a rock. And it's why our industry is fighting back so hard against their attempt to impose those same regulations, to provide good guidance to states like Oklahoma on how you ought to do it by doing these same regulations. You want to kill an industry and kill a lot of jobs? That'll do it. Slows us down to a crawl. And you see that happening in other industries. So I don't think there's a choice for any thoughtful American not to be involved if you want to keep our economic prosperity going. We have to stop this extreme overregulation within industry, and we can do it. One more election.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the bio, you've heard his conversation and his remarks today. Knowing the man personally, you cannot find anybody who's more successful in business, more committed to his family, and who walks with humility more often than Mr. Larry Nichols. Please give him a hand.
And a great lieutenant governor.